Hey everyone, Catherine Matai-Sundell here with Civility Partners. Thank you so much for joining me on this webinar today. We are going to talk about the other stuff that goes with reopening your workplace. There is a ton of information out there about how to be safe as you reopen, and the protocols that you need to have in place, and the training that you need to do with your employees related to safety. So I'm going to go past that and give you a part two of all of that stuff. And as a culture consultant, this is the kind of stuff that I actually think is even more important. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let me just introduce myself to you first. Again, I'm Catherine Matai-Sundell. I am the CEO and founder of Civility Partners, and we are an HR consulting firm focused specifically on building positive workplace cultures. And to share a little bit about how we got into that, I was the director of human resources for a nonprofit organization and found myself working with someone who bullied. And this person was an uber excessive micromanager. He yelled a lot. He made life hard. And it was a frustrating experience for me. I personally felt bullied by this individual, so I felt targeted. And as the director of HR, of course, I was dealing with a lot of the problems that he created for the organization. Lots of turnover in his department, lots of people spending time in my office kind of complaining about his behavior, and just was a lot of wasted time and resources on this person. During that time, I started getting my master's degree and ended up doing all of my research on this topic of workplace bullying. Fast forward all these years later, and we really focus on resolving things like bullying and harassment and really any negative, ugly behaviors at work. And so we often get called in when the organization has bad stuff happening. Over the course of the last 15 years, I've written 3 books, and Civility Partners has served a huge variety of industries. So I feel like I've seen it all. Of course, I still see a lot of surprising things too. And I've been cited in a lot of places. I've been fortunate to have people turn to me looking for expertise. So today we're going to talk about several different things. I want to talk with you about developing a plan for reopening. Again, we're not going to talk about safety. There's already tons of information out there on the safety aspect of your reopening plan. I want to talk to you about the people part, the emotions, the ugly stuff that you're going to experience as people return. I want to give you some strategies for building trust and communicating with your workforce. We'll talk about some training programs and just talk about culture and things that you can do to make sure you're sort of rebuilding an organization that has a positive workplace culture. So I just want to be clear, I am not an expert in COVID-19 safety protocols or in any safety protocols. I'm not a safety manager or a risk manager. I'm also not an employment law attorney. So I'm not going to give you any information about the Families First Act or different laws that you have to abide by. And by the way, every state, county, and city has its own rules as well. I'm not in a position to be able to answer a bunch of questions for you in that regard. What I am is an expert in building and sustaining positive workplace cultures. And so this webinar is really going to be about reopening your workplace with your people in mind. And again, I'm going to go beyond the physical safety and talk about the psychological safety, the mental health, and employee engagement, really. So what makes me qualified to talk about all of this stuff? I'm not a crisis expert, but here's the thing. When I go into organizations that have toxic work environments, I see a lot of stuff that I really believe you will see as you reopen the workplace. I see a lot of emotions. Sometimes distrust, take Uber, for example. They're going to have a lot of distrust when people start coming back into the office, given the way that they laid off a bunch of employees. I see a lot of miscommunication. So I see a lot of things that I think you will be seeing. And so I do feel that I am sort of uniquely qualified to talk about the people stuff that comes with reopening the work environment or your workplace. And so I'm going to transferable skills. I'm going to take everything I know about culture change and toxic work environments and organizational development and apply it here to your reopening the workplace. And I think you'll find this quite useful, and hopefully it causes you to think about how you reopen a little bit differently. So this webinar and the information that I'm going to share today is based on sort of 5 thoughts that I have about where people are at. So first off, I think that anxiety and stress and burnout are currently running high and will continue to run high. I spoke to a colleague yesterday who is telling me, her kids are back at daycare finally, and she was happy because one of her daughters especially really needs the social stuff. However, it causes her anxiety because what if, daycares are cesspools of germs? What if her daughter comes back home with COVID, right? And who knows what the other parents are doing in their daily work life, and if they're abiding by the safety rules that all of our different counties are putting out there. So even though in some ways it's returning to normal that her daughter is back in daycare, she's still anxious about it. Also, anybody who's been through a rough time, you all know this. A lot of times when we're in difficult situations, we push our emotions down in order to get through the difficult situation. We ignore our emotions and sort of engage in fight or flight, right? We usually fight and try to figure out how to get out of it. And so that's what we've all been doing. We've had our heads down. We're trying to get work done. We want to make sure that we're not on the chopping block if there's more layoffs coming. So we're all just working hard, and we're suppressing probably a lot of those feelings. And I do believe that as we start reopening the workplaces and things do start to go to normal, people will start to recognize the feelings that they've been holding on to all this time, and they will start to bubble up. Secondly, I am pretty positive that your employees have not been totally honest with you about how they're doing. So when, as managers, you've been talking to employees about how they're doing, do they need anything, how are they feeling, they probably haven't been wide opening to you and telling you their deepest, darkest feelings for a couple reasons. One, it's not a social norm to do that. We've been trained early on that at work, we keep our emotions to ourselves, and there's a sense of crossing a professional line if we get too open with how we're feeling. And secondly, again, if they look weak, they're going to be worried that they're on the chopping block, right? So expressing emotions has this stigma attached to it that you're a weak person or a weak link. And so they've been really fighting to show you that they're valuable and they can take it and that they're resilient. So I think I know there's a lot of things your employees are feeling that they're not telling you about. Thirdly, I think aggressive behaviors such as harassment and bullying have probably increased. And actually, I don't think this, I know this for a couple of reasons. One, when we're in a high stress environment, that tends to increase aggressiveness. So lots and lots and lots of academic research showing that high stress environments are a risk factor or a predicator for aggressive behaviors. So we're all in high stress. It's absolutely 100% true that several people have probably been engaging in aggressive behavior as they've been trying to deal with their stress. Secondly, at my office at Civility Partners, we have a Google alert on abrasive conduct or abusive conduct. And we've actually seen it. We keep getting emails that the searches have gone up 50% from last week, 70% from last week, 127% from the week before. So we have been watching the searches for that phrase abusive conduct really rise over the last month or so. So we know that people are looking for resources there. So another reason that your employees are feeling, probably burnt out. Fourth, returning to the workplace might be shocking. I'm thinking about one of my clients. They've just recently taken down cubicle walls and reorganized the office or moved the seating chart around so that it was a more open concept. And they did that at the request of their employees. We had done a climate assessment and people said, we don't want the gray cubicle walls. Can you get rid of them? And so they did that. And literally, I don't know, that was like 3 months ago. And now I'm thinking, and they've got the shared snacks and they did a chalkboard wall, and they were really trying to kind of upgrade to this new trend of an open concept that's a little more fun feeling. And now when they reopen the office, these people are going to come back into the workplace and there's going to be, I'm picturing caution tape across the kitchen, don't enter, no going into the conference room. If you go to the bathroom, wear some gloves because they have a shared bathroom with everyone else on their floor. So all of a sudden this beautiful workspace is feeling a little more like Chernobyl. And I'm just kind of picturing caution tape and signs everywhere. By the way, here in San Diego, we're taking the temperature before you walk into the door. So I think that's going to be jarring for people. Anybody who's anxious to get back to work and is excited for things to reopen, I think they're excited for the old way. And when they get there and realize what they're facing, it's going to be jarring. And fifth, I know that your employees are simultaneously going to want some old stuff and some of the new stuff. So, for example, employees are going to be craving some kind of back to normal stuff, right? So, if you used to have a certain kind of a staff meeting or shared snacks or happy hour, your employees are going to be craving that kind of old way. And so you're going to have to try to give it to them as much as you can, right? They're also going to be looking towards the new stuff. They might feel like they've proven that working remotely, it works. They've been just as productive. Or maybe their kid has been in the background while they've been working, and you've been okay with that as an employer, where normally kids were not accepted in the workplace before, right? So they might be feeling like, gosh, I really need it for my kid to be able to be present when I'm working, and now I know that you'll tolerate that. So they're going to be pushing for some of these new things that they've experienced, at the same time craving some of the old things that used to be. So these are the 5 things that I know your employees are feeling. So let's talk about some things that I know about change through the organizational development world that I'm in. So organizational development is a field of study that's really focused on taking an organization that's one way and making it something different, whether it's a new culture, a culture of customer service, or it's a real change in the organization and how it functions. So we know from organizational development research that at the beginning of a change, before change usually happens, people are feeling sort of comfortable and in control of how it used to be. And honestly, we often talk to leaders about selling a problem that the change solves. So don't sell the change, you got to sell the problem first. And then, then they'll get excited about the solution or the change. But as we know, we were all thrust into fear, anger, and resistance pretty quickly. Before we knew it, we were being forced to work from home, or essential workplaces all of a sudden had to, change everything and wear masks and all this stuff. And then from there, once we kind of get over our fear, anger, and resistance, we move into experimentation, where we sort of start to put our toe in the water and feel comfortable that the change is moving. And this is where we're sort of on the fence, half old way, half new way. And then eventually we come to accept the change. So this is the process that we go through when we're going through change. And there is a lot of research on kind of how to communicate with people during these different phases. So when people are in fear, anger, and resistance, which we were all definitely in when this all really happened, when COVID really hit the fan. And I think we'll now be moving into this again as we start to reopen, right? So theoretically, people were comfortable, COVID hit, we all had to change everything. So we were in fear, anger, and resistance. We started to get comfortable with the new situation and experimenting with it and making it work. And maybe by now we've sort of come to accept in some ways that this is just what it is. Well, now all of a sudden we're thrust back into fear, anger, and resistance as there's a new change. Now we're reopening, and it's going to be a new kind of reopening. So some communication tips that are clearly documented in the research, and I see it personally, that these are some of the things that you've got to be able to be doing in this period of fear, anger, and resistance. You've got to work with your employees to define the future together. You've really got to listen to their fears. So let your employees express what they're unhappy about, what they're afraid of. We know there's going to be varying levels of people feeling like the virus is over and all good, all the way up to the other end of the spectrum of people feeling super afraid of coming back. Maybe they live with a high-risk person. One of my clients, they have an employee whose wife has a lot of health issues. So I doubt he'll be coming to work anytime soon, right? He's afraid for her. Be really transparent. Talk to people about what you know and what you don't know. I told my staff yesterday, I know we're going to be opening soon. I'm not really sure when. Technically in San Diego, I can open my office. I'm not quite ready to do that, but it's just being open about here's what I don't know, and here's the answers I'm still seeking, right? Never try to talk people out of their feelings. If they're saying I'm afraid of something, never say, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or don't worry about it. You've got to validate the way they feel. And people are going to bring problems to you that you want to work with them to solve. Now, as people move into the experimentation phase for reopening, and perhaps they're in the experimentation phase from, being at home and remote, you got to give people direction and freedom. So you got to tell them, here's what I expect, and you have the freedom to make that work. So you might say, I expect you to work 8 hours a day, but you can do those 8 hours throughout the day or in a way that works for you. So give them expectations and then let them have some freedom to experiment and figure out what works. Give people permission to problem solve. Encourage them to take risks in some ways, make room for their ideas about how to do things and collaborate and provide support. So these are some key communication tips that we know from the organizational development world. These are some things that you should be doing right now that show people you have empathy for their needs and that you see, psychological safety as equally important to physical safety. All right, so let's talk about creating your reopening the workplace plan. So all of the plans that we've been working on with our clients have this sort of model at the top where you're going to be planning, and trying as much as you can to put forth some sort of solid plan that people can look at. And then from there, you're going to be focused on returning, of course. And by the way, I'd love to see any of your comments too. I've got the comment box open, so I just wanted to mention that. Okay, let me get my notes back up here. Okay, so you definitely want to be putting some sort of plan in place so that you have something that's written that you can sort of share. But keep in mind that as you return to the workplace, you're going to be adjusting it all the time and replanning. And so this is a kind of a chart that's not fluid. It doesn't go in one direction. So you're going to be planning, adjusting, returning, all simultaneously. And so you really want to communicate that with your employees as well, that this plan is fluid and that it will change. So who should be on your reopening the workplace planning team? Well, I have some thoughts on that. But let me back up a little bit. So when I get a call that there's a toxic work environment, we go in and we do a climate assessment, and we do that on our own so that we have people who trust us and because we're an outsider, so they're honest with us. They share confidential information about how they're feeling with us because we're outsiders. We put together a report, share it with leaders, We share a summary version with the employees. And then we work with the leaders to create an action team. And the action team is made up of some leaders and employees, so that it's a group of people all working together from all different levels of the organization. So I'm applying that same principle here, where your reopening plan or your reopening team would be a lot like my toxic environment action team, where you're using a leader, someone from HR certainly has to be on the team, a risk manager, a safety manager. And really, you want to make sure that you have employees on the team who can speak to the different unique challenges of all the different groups. So your plan, your team has to be diverse in sort of organizational hierarchy and department, but it also has to be diverse in terms of race, gender, all of those things, so that because each group is going to have faced different challenges. And so you want to make sure those challenges can be addressed. So what's your first step in creating your reopening plan? Well, first off, you've got to define the new normal. You have to figure out what you're shooting for. So I don't think, just like with culture, you're not going to sit back and let culture occur because you have a culture, whether you mean to or not, right? You're not just going to sit back and wait for culture to happen and then address it. You're always got to be keeping your eye on, what does culture look like? What does that mean? And how do we reach that vision for our culture? Well, the same rules apply here. You've got to define the new normal. What's the vision for the future look like? And you can do that through surveys and focus groups. So that is step number one. Once you have your team together, then you got to work with your employees, with your entire workforce, to define the new normal. And you're going to answer these types of questions, right? Where are employees at? I want to give you some tips on your survey questions, because I definitely encourage you to figure out what they think the new normal is, so that you can define it using their ideas, right? So first off, the wrong questions to ask are things like these questions. And I don't normally make fun of or talk poorly about people out there in the world. It goes against Civility Partners' core values, but I'm going to do it now because I was so appalled by these questions. They're so terribly written. There's a company called Amplify that is putting this survey out, and it's free. And I'm assuming the point is to get on their e-newsletter so they can market things to you. But these questions are horrible. Do not ask these questions. And the reason that they're horrible is they're not actionable. So the whole point of a survey is to engage in action after the survey is over, and you cannot act on any of these questions. They're also not reliable or valid because they're too broad. I feel exhausted. To what? Because of why, right? What are you exhausted because I'm exhausted because I only got 4 hours of sleep last night, not because of COVID. I'm exhausted because I only got 4 hours of sleep. For other reasons. So, these are not good questions. So instead, you want to be asking questions like these. These are actionable questions. Whatever the responses to them are, the organization can act on them. And as a manager, even if you're not doing an employee survey, as a manager, you've got to be asking these types of questions. Are you getting what you need to do your job? What do you need as you return? And I'll go back to these questions. These are the questions you need the answers to if you're going to effectively create a new normal or co-create a new normal with your organization. All right, so I do see one question. How do I cope with the workload after COVID-19 in the office? So you're asking, there's a lot of work now that COVID's over, or there will be once you get back to the work, and how do you cope with that? Hopefully your organization is creating an environment that makes room for that stress and allows you to express where your frustrations are with that stress. Your leaders should be setting expectations, that hopefully they're not saying, okay, now that we're back to work, everybody should be working 12-hour days to catch up. That would not be the way to go about it. So we've got to ease people back into the culture or back into the workplace over time. So hopefully that helps. I'm going to address stress a little bit more throughout. So sit tight, and there's probably more to answer your question as we go forward. Okay, so how do you communicate about reopening? If you're creating a reopening the workplace plan, and by the way, even if you're not on that team in your organization, you yourself as a manager need to have some sort of reopening plan in your mind about, here's what I think it's going to look like for our team, right? So you want to make sure that you're thinking about communication and what you should be communicating about. So in the weeks leading up to reopening, you want to be, essentially telling your employees that physical and psychological safety are equally important to you. And that's the whole point of this webinar, is I want you to understand that physical safety has 95% of everyone's attention, but that's only 50% of what you should be focusing on. The other 50% is that people feel safe psychologically, that they feel that they're able to tell you, I don't feel physically safe, or I'm not ready to come back, or I'm stressed out. So those are both equally important things. You want to be talking about your commitment to rebuild. So really pull out that leadership hat and focus on, using the leadership, vocabulary. Pull that leadership hat out and talk about the future, that you're committed to rebuilding and making things better. You want to encourage questions and feedback so that this feels collaborative. You want to ask employees, what do you need from me to feel comfortable? And so your communication really has to be much more than just the policies and procedures. You want to be talking about their safety as well, psychologically, and really making room for collaboration there. Once your workplace reopens, you want to make sure that you're still talking about physical and psychological safety, and making sure through your communication that people see that these are equally important. You definitely want to welcome people, give them ways to reconnect with each other, help them get settled. I took this picture yesterday. This is the Starbucks across the street from my office, and they had this table up, and I thought this was a great example of kind of what I'm talking about here, that you want to welcome people back in. We have a mastermind group every other Friday where we're talking with other leaders and HR consultants around kind of what they're doing with reopening. And one woman shared on the mastermind last week that what she did was create kind of a Zen place for when people walk in the door, so that, you walk in the door, and kind of going back to my analogy of Chernobyl, she recognized they're going to walk into a place that feels very different. There's caution tape and signs, and everybody's got hazmat suits on, that's going to feel ugly. And so she said there's kind of this area or room that you walk through when you come in the front door. So she turned that into a Zen kind of a place, and she put some chairs in there so you could even kind of sit down and just take a breather. And she felt like even if people don't take advantage of this area that she created, they'll feel it because they have to walk by it. So it's a good reminder at the very least to kind of take a deep breath as you walk into this space. So that's another example of that. I thought that was a really cool idea. So again, you want to continue asking employees for feedback and encourage them to ask you questions, and really continue to check in with people on how they're doing. Honestly, as you're reopening, I would take a look at your onboarding procedures, and in some ways you're re-onboarding people back into your workplace. And so pull out that onboarding checklist that you have for when you get new hires, and what can you pull from that? What can you use that would apply here now in this new situation? So, again, you just really want to acknowledge what people have been through, thank them for what work they've been doing, and then really find ways to welcome them and sort of reconnect them with each other as well as their workplace. And then as you reopen, you want to make sure that you're just continuing to keep the communication going. You want to, continue to talk about both physical and psychological safety. Thank you, guys. I'm seeing some comments. So thank you for your compliments. I do recommend another survey. So you're going to do a survey and/or focus groups, or at the very least, managers need to ask questions, before you reopen. And then once you reopen, you want to revisit and ask some more questions. How are people doing? Are they comfortable? Are they getting what they need? It's a great way to build trust and continue to show people that you're interested in what they need and what they have to say. So, going back to my sort of communication tips during an organizational change, it's really about co-creating the future, and that is key. All right, moving on. So let's talk about engagement and productivity, and make sure that, again, when somebody asks, what if we get back to work and the leaders are kind of like, okay, we're back, get back to work. Oh, by the way, we've got a lot of work that we didn't get to because we were working from home. So don't forget about that. You can't have people come back in and just expect that they're going to start producing again. So again, I really think the organizations that focus early on employee well-being, I think they're going to find more productivity over the course of time than if you try to force people into productivity as soon as you return. So what are some tips? What are some things that you can do? Well, first off, consider your employee core, or your organizational core values. And how can you use your core values to guide your decisions and establish expectations for people? Ooh, there's a little bug. I'm encouraging all of my clients to use their core values as part of their reopening the workplace plan, and that as you're creating it, and even once it's been written, to really run it through the core values test, right? Does this match our core values? Does the stuff that we're asking people to do meet with our organizational core values? So use your core values to guide your decisions. Let me give you some examples. This is one of Civility Partners' core values, one of my company core values. It's to be legit, which means that we're supposed to be always focused on doing the right thing, being professional, having integrity, being our authentic selves, listening to each other, and communicating openly. If this is my company core value, and I don't actually do these things when we're reopening, then that's a problem. And I bring this up because when I go into toxic work environments, this is one of the main things that these clients of mine have in common is they have not been using their core values. So, I'll walk into an organization that's got some horrible public, declaration of sexual harassment, and I've been called in to help fix it and change the culture. And I walk in, and there above the receptionist's head are the core values. And I'm just thinking, if this organization had been living the core values, we wouldn't be in this mess. I wouldn't be here. So I have a consulting business because companies don't live their core values. So it's really important that you do consider your core values. Don't ignore them. The whole reason they're in existence is to guide your behavior and your decisions. So use your core values. So, this is one of Civility Partners' core values. And so I've got to make sure that I'm listening to my employees and being open about, my thoughts and all of that. To give you some other examples, there's a company called EBI, and EBI and Civility Partners are actually co-creating an ebook. So we'll have that available for you if you're interested. But EBI, one of their core values is protection of information. So they're a background check company, so that their core value, I think, is something like protect other people's information as if it was your own. Well, they took that idea of protection and sort of expanded it, and they were thinking, our job is to protect our own, to protect our employees. It's not just about protecting information. We need to protect our family, basically. And so they decided to create masks. So they actually started a little side mask business so that they could give those masks to their employees. And that's where it started from. So that's an example of really using your core values as a way to make decisions. Let's see, I've got a couple questions here. Use Stephen Covey's attitude toward employees. They volunteer to be there, so they need a meaningful relationship to be encouraged to give fully. Absolutely, that's a great point. Another question. After you make your return to work plan, what does a manager do when he or she feels the employees are pushing the envelope with regards to making accommodations? The manager feels like they are asking for too many accommodations. That is a great question, and here is my answer. The manager has to set expectations before reopening, right? And so I think you'll find it more difficult to reopen, let people be, and then try to field these requests for accommodations as they come. So, and also from an HR perspective, the accommodations have to be consistent, right? So it will behoove you and the organization to say, here's what we're going to allow. And anything past that, any special accommodations are case by case, and we can't guarantee anything. But if you really are very clear about expectations before people get back to the office, you'll find it easier to say no to some of those requests. So for example, one of our clients, this office is voluntarily, reopening. So it's kind of like we're turning the lights on and the door will be unlocked and someone will be there, but it's all voluntary. And that way they're sort of easing into people coming back. Eventually, they're going to have to say, you have to be here, right? It's no longer voluntary. You have to come. But what about that one employee I mentioned whose wife has some lung problems? So she, is in danger with COVID. So he might be the kind of person we could make an accommodation for because of his wife's situation. So it's going to be up to organizations at some point to definitely draw a hard line to say we can't accommodate this or we can. So I guess the bottom line is be open to what they need, accommodate as best you can. For a while, it's going to be random, hit or miss, inconsistent. But over time, you do want to start setting hard lines, and you want to set them far out in advance. So you want to say, in 6 weeks, we're going to stop allowing people to work from home unless it's a real special case. And you continue to kind of announce that over the next 6 weeks so that it's not sneaking up on anybody. So hopefully that helped. In educational institutes, what kinds of problems could we face? That is a big question. There's a lot, right? So you've got students and all kinds of different types of walks of life coming through the organization. If you could share a little bit more about what you're asking about, give me a little bit more narrow of a question, I will definitely answer it for you. Okay, So what else? Let me just check my notes here. Okay. So again, run your reopening the workplace plan through a core values test. So once it's written, definitely kind of revisit it and just to make sure that you really are following, your core values, because those should be your guiding light. All right. So it's also really important, as I've been saying, to acknowledge trauma and emotions that people are facing. And sorry, I feel like there's a hair or something in my eyeball. Okay. Acknowledge what people are feeling, right? So be very intentional about how you reconnect employees. So what that means is, find ways for them to rebuild their relationships. And I'll say this from personal experience. I saw my staff member yesterday. She has been working remote, and actually we've been on Zoom every single day almost. So a lot of times we'll just turn on our Zoom and we don't actually really even interact. We're just kind of both working, but at least we can see each other. So it kind of feels like we're in the office together. And I saw her yesterday for the first time. I went to give her it's her 3rd year anniversary at Civility Partners. I went to give her a gift, and it was kind of weird. Like, it was like almost like we didn't know what to say to each other. So when I think about that, and as close as this employee and I are, it makes me wonder about employees who, aren't really connected and maybe haven't seen each other. So you really got to find some ways to connect employees. So again, pull out that onboarding list that you use when you have new hires, and what are some of the ways that you connect new hires to the workplace, and maybe you can sort of repurpose those to reconnect everybody. I do encourage you to share your own emotions. I do encourage you to sort of make that paradigm shift where emotions aren't acceptable in the workplace, and start opening up. And as a manager, certainly you have to appear as a strong leader as well. But if you can start just kind of sharing, this is how I'm feeling or what I've been through, I think it'll start to open the door for other people to share as well. So we are going to have to become experts in some way in managing emotions. I do encourage you to make sure employees can remain cognizant of their own emotions. As I said, when we're in trauma or a difficult situation, we kind of hunker down and try to get through the challenge, and we don't think about our emotions until it's over. So a part of emotional well-being is to talk about our emotions, be aware of them. So it might be an important way to help your employees cope and become more productive more quickly. There's actually a ton of apps out there where you can check how you're feeling, and it sort of reminds you each and every day to sort of check in with yourself. So something like that might be a great, cheap way to offer a benefit to your employees that you're, paying for that. Another idea on this is to employ wellness ambassadors. So you might, maybe these are people on your reopening the workplace team or a separate committee. We have a couple committees at one of my clients where they have a social committee and a professional development committee. So maybe it would be, one of those committees that takes this on, but make sure that you have employees focused on well-being for employees so that it's being addressed. And again, use your core values. So what I might do is just open up your core values in a manager meeting and just kind of say, let's look at our core values and how do we apply emotional well-being to this? What ideas can we come up with that sort of are inspired by our core values? Let me see, I have a question. What would be the vision of the organization in the next 6 months? That's up to you guys to decide. You've got to talk it through. And again, talk with your employees about what their vision for the future is so that you can co-create it. And that's going to be key. So I want to point you to a concept. As I was thinking about this ebook that we're writing, and trying to think about what are some things that I know about trauma and from my own work? And I kind of came up with this idea, trauma-informed management. There is a school of thought in counseling and psychology that's called trauma-informed care. And the idea behind trauma-informed care is that it says, instead of asking what's wrong with you that we need to fix it, it's a better question to ask what happened to you and how do we help you deal with it? And so it's a bit of a shift of a mindset. And if you change the question, then the way you respond to this patient in a counseling scenario, would be different. It's not about diagnosing you and fixing you. It's about helping you understand what you went through and how it affected you so that you can improve or recover. And so I think that applies now. And there are 6 concepts that you have to think about if you were to be a trauma-informed care counselor. And I think they apply now. So I'm going to coin the term trauma-informed management and talk through these. So step number 1 is making sure this person feels safe. And, you have to make sure people feel safe physically and psychologically. You have to provide trust and transparency. So you have to create a trusting environment where people can feel comfortable to talk about what they went through. You have to provide support, and you as a manager have to provide support, and also employees have to be able to support each other. So what that means for you is figuring out what are some channels that we can set up for employees to support each other. It has to include collaboration, co-creating the vision, co-creating the future, co-creating problem solving. People have to be empowered to heal. And then you also have to consider demographics. So, for example, lots of research that the Hispanic community is going to be more widely impacted financially by COVID than maybe the Caucasian group. So how does that play into our plan? How can we make room to ensure there isn't any disparate impact on that group? So these are the kinds of things you want to be thinking about. And what I noticed as my team and I were researching trauma-informed management or trauma-informed care and how it might apply to COVID-19 and our managers, what I realized is everything I just said actually ties right back into the organizational development tools that I gave you at the beginning of the webinar. So all of these things that are trauma-informed care, actually the organizational development space was already talking about these things. And what that says is that people like me who are focused on organizational development understand that change in and of itself is traumatizing. And so we were already talking about how to make room for people to heal from organizational change. So there was a juxtaposition there that really worked, and I just wanted to point that out. So one of the ways to really empower your employees is to provide them with flexibility, right? So again, I'm a mom, I have 2 kids, and I own my own business. So thankfully, I can kind of come and go as I please in some ways. Of course, I have clients who rely on me for things. So I'm able to be flexible. I provide that to my staff. And that's really going to be the key here, is that every person is going to have different ideas about what they need. And you've got to find a way to get that information from them so that you can give them what they need as much as you can. Now, to kind of back to your question, Daryl, about too many accommodations, I want to make sure you're not seeing me as someone who's saying the employees should have whatever they want. They've all been through trauma. Give them whatever they need. This is ultimately about productivity and getting back on track. And so what I'm saying is work with them as much as you can in a way that makes sense for the organization, just like you would any other employee issue, right? If an employee is injured, you're not just going to say, well, if you're not back to work in 2 weeks, you're fired. You're going to give them ability and time to heal. And maybe they need to have their workload adjusted a bit to accommodate for that medical issue. But at some point, there's going to be expectation that they're going to do what they need to do. And so, similar to this, similar to where we're at. Some other trainings that I think you need to be offering your employees. So you're probably already doing a safety training. We're required to here in San Diego County. I don't know what your county requires or what your country or city requires. But I do recommend beyond that safety training, you should be kind of adding some additional things in there, such as what resources are available to people. Where do they get help if they're feeling stressed out, and how do they manage that stress, and give them some tools on building resilience. So I think these are going to be extra tools that will show employees you care about them. Your managers, supervisors, leaders, anybody who's got people underneath them needs some additional training as we reopen. They might do well with some training around emotional intelligence and engaging in conversations that are emotional. Again, emotions are not usually accepted at work. So I think that paradigm needs to shift, which means you also need to train people on that. Help ensure that your managers and leaders are leading with empathy, managing change in the right ways, that they know how to communicate, and that they're collaborating. So I think these are some additional trainings that would be very useful for your organization to be offering to make sure that reopening goes smoothly. On the topic of resilience, I wanted to give you some tips on that. And I think there are some things that you can provide your employees to help them build their own resilience. So anxiety stems from the unknown. That is the core of where any anxiety about anything comes from. It's all tied into the unknown. So you've got to make things as predictable as you possibly can. Resilience is about adapting in adversity, trauma, some sort of stress, a challenge, right? And there's actually a lot of research on what makes someone resilient, what skills or personality characteristics or tools are resilient people using that cause them to be resilient. And the answer is there's several things, but here are 5. One thing resilient people do is create and execute plans. So when a resilient person finds themselves in a challenge, they are able to see the end of the challenge and create a plan to get to that end. And that is a skill that resilient people have. And so they're able to sort of climb out of a hole by creating and executing a series of steps that they've come up with in their mind. Well, you can help your employees create and execute a plan. Again, co-create with your employees what the future looks like and how you're going to get back to that normal that everybody's looking for. And what does that normal look like? So by working with your employees to create this vision for the future and then develop action steps to get there, you are going to help them build their resilience. They will move from hopeless and helpless to resilient. Secondly, resilient people lean on their connections. They recognize that they can't do it alone, and people who are resilient tend to lean on somebody or a group of people. So that goes back to you and your workplace, making sure there's opportunities for people to connect so that your employees can lean on their connections. Resilient people are flexible. They recognize that getting out of the hole that they've got to climb out of is not a direct route, and that they're going to have to shift and move as things happen. And so you've got to give your employees the opportunity to be flexible. You've got to be flexible in how you manage in order to help your people be resilient. Resilient people see challenge as an opportunity for self-discovery. So rather than seeing challenge as something that's horrible, they see it as a way to grow. And so help your employees, understand what they've been through, help them self-discover, have conversations about what people learned about themselves, make that part of the conversation. So you're giving people the opportunity to be resilient. And lastly, resilient people are in tune with their emotions. So again, making room for emotions, asking people how they're feeling, opening up about your own emotions. So literally, these are 5 tangible things that you can do to build resilience in your people. And building resilience in your people is going to make them productive faster. And this is back to that question around how do you cope with a bigger workload now that you're back? These are the ways that you cope. This is what resilient people do, and that's what you need to cope, is to be resilient. So I really believe in these 5 things. So I'll just kind of close on this, and then we'll have a little bit of time for any other questions. In the end, what I know about organizational culture is that it requires leadership to set clear expectations about behavior and performance and to hold people accountable to that. It requires policies and procedures, which you're going to have with your reopening plan and any updated policies you have, and behavior. So people have to behave in certain ways, but it's up to leadership to define what that looks like. And with those 3 things working together, that's how you create a culture of productivity, a culture of resilience, a culture of, grit and getting back to it. And those are the 3 things that you need to focus on as you reopen. So with that, we've got 4 minutes for questions. If you would like this ebook that we're finishing up, I will be happy to send it to you along with a list of great questions that you could be asking in your one-on-ones when you meet with employees. The ebook will be ready next week. Unfortunately, it's not ready just yet, but if you email info@civilitypartners.com, I'll be happy to send that to you. Any other final questions or thoughts? I appreciate all of the interactivity as we've been going through this.
All right, folks, so we do have time for a few questions. Go ahead and ask them in the comments section, and we'll load them onto the screen for Catherine to answer.
I'll take it by your silence that there are no questions.
All right, well, thank you, Catherine, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This webinar will be archived on our Facebook and YouTube pages at IEEE USA for viewing afterwards. Check back daily for updates on future webinars, and hope you all have a great day. Take care, Catherine.
Hey, one more time. So someone says they'd love a copy of the ebook. Again, please email me at info@civilitypartners.com, and we will send it to you. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.